In today's video, I'm continuing my series of 2022 makeup favorites, and today I'm focusing on cheek products, so highlighters, blushes, bronzers, and face palettes. So if you'd like to see what my top cheek products of the year have been, just keep on watching. Before we get into it, if you're new here, welcome. If you haven't subscribed to my channel already, I would love for you to consider doing so. I like to focus on high-end, luxury, and indie makeup, and I like to do a combination of trying out new makeup, reviewing new makeup, demoing products, and also dipping into my collection and playing with some of my older makeup. So if all of that sounds good to you, I would love for you to subscribe. So now let's get into my top cheek products of the year. I really tried to pare these down with just one or two choices for each category. For most of the categories, I've split them into my favorite cream version of that product, my favorite liquid, if that's applicable, and my favorite powder version of that product. So let's get started with blushes, and I have two favorite cream blushes that I wanted to talk about. The first one is in this little pan here. This is from Salt New York. This is their lip and cheek tint. And this is in the shade Sunburnt, which they brought out this summer. This to me is one of the most perfect blush shades, and I wore it especially in the summer and into the fall. It does have a little bit of warmth, but it's not too warm. There's the color on my finger. It's just such a beautiful natural blush color. It's the kind of color that can go with so many different looks. Looks very natural for my skin tone, and I think for a lot of skin tones, Sunburnt is a great name for it. My skin doesn't really go this color when I'm sunburned. It goes more of a kind of very garish, bright red color. So this to me is more of an ideal sun-kissed color. It's just a little bit more toned down. There's a little bit of brown in there, a little bit of pink, a little bit of peach. It's really just a stunning color. I'm actually gonna pat a little bit of this to add a little bit of color onto my cheeks right now. Now, the other cream blush I wanted to mention is from Westman Atelier. This is their Baby Cheeks Cream Blush Stick formula, and I wanted to specifically talk about the shade Mimi. This is another that has gotten so much use for me, and it's very similar in a way to the Sunburnt shade in that it's a more neutral color. It's one that's really easy to wear, looks very natural on my skin tone, and goes with so many different makeup looks, but you can see having them swatch next to each other here that Mimi is just a little bit cooler toned, so it leans more toward that kind of proper neutral category. The texture of the Westman Atelier cream blushes is slightly more matte. It's not really a matte finish, but it's a bit more matte than the Salt New York creams, which have a little bit more of a dewy finish to them. The Westman Atelier ones I find are quite pigmented as well, so really easy to work with. And this color Mimi was just such a winner for me this year. We're having another very windy day here, so if you can hear the wind in the background, I apologize. I wanted to go next into my powder blush picks, and again, I have two choices that I wanted to talk about. One is from Pat McGrath. So Pat McGrath's Divine Blushes are my all-time favorite powder blush formula. And she brought out this new shade, Nude Venus 2, as part of her holiday collection this year. And this is another one, just like the two creams that I showed you, that is a very natural looking tone on my skin. The formula is incredible. It's just super soft, super easy to build and work with and blend out on the cheeks. And the embossing in the pan doesn't hurt either. This is another color that just looks very natural on my skin, goes with so many different makeup looks. It's neutral, leaning a little bit toward the warm side, but there's a little bit of coolness in this as well. It almost feels like a mauve and a peach got mixed together. So it's just a beautiful, neutral, really natural looking blush shade. And it's become one of my favorite shades of the Pat McGrath Divine Blushes. And the other powder blush is this Dior Backstage Rosy Glow blush. And this is the shade 001 Pink, which is my favorite of the two shades. I also do really like the coral one. It's a beautiful kind of pastel pinky peach, but the pink I find myself reaching for a lot more, usually as more of an accent or adjusting color when I already have another blush down. But this has been so useful for that type of purpose, for really just cooling off a look, bringing some balance back into the cheeks. It has a very brightening, life-giving effect, and I love the formula of this as well. It's very soft, very smooth, very easy to blend. And you can see from my first swatch there, I picked up quite a lot of product, but it's just very sheer, so that also makes it really great for using as an accent or adjusting color. It's not going to do too much all at once. You can be a little bit more gradual about how you add that and build that color on. Now for my favorite highlighters of the year, I just have two choices, and I actually haven't included a single powder highlighter. I do have a powder highlighter that I'm going to talk about in my top cheek palette of the year, but the two single highlighters I wanted to focus on are creams and liquids. So the cream I've chosen is the Victoria Beckham Reflect Highlighter. This is currently only available in one shade, the shade Pearl, and this is my #1 favorite cream highlighter of all time. I just love the presentation first of all, but most importantly, the product itself is just my perfect cream highlighter. It has a beautiful emollient texture, but not to the level that it feels greasy, but it definitely has a creamy feel. And to me, this just has the perfect balance of translucency and opacity. So it looks very natural on the skin. And there's something about this that seems to be a little bit blurring on the skin as well. And I just love to use this to finish off a look. It finishes off any look so beautifully. Just adds some life and brightness back into the skin after you've done a face of makeup. The color is really subtle, and there's just something so special about the way this reflects the light. So that's my favorite cream highlighter of the year and of all time. And then my liquid highlighter choice is the Lisa Eldridge Elevated Glow in the shade Pink Moon. You can maybe see that I'm about halfway through this bottle, and this is my second bottle of this. I've gone through a full bottle already, and I think it only came out in springtime. Definitely use this a whole lot. It has similar qualities to the Victoria Beckham in that the color is really beautiful. The way it looks on the skin is very special. The Elevated Glow formula has a little bit of a tightening ability as well. And this Pink Moon shade, I actually love to start it out underneath my eyes. So after I've done all my skincare, this is often the first makeup step that I'll go in with, is just a little bit of Pink Moon under the eyes. It has a little bit of a peachiness. It's still a very nice light color, so it's appropriate for people with very fair skin. And it really works very well for my skin tone, but it just has this slight kind of peachiness there that I find helps to cancel out a little bit of the blue and kind of purpley tones that are underneath my eyes, and it also has that slight tightening effect, and of course the beautiful reflect and brightening effect. So I like to put it under my eyes and then blend that out all over the tops of my cheekbones, up a little bit onto my temples, and anywhere else that I want to bring a little bit of brightness to the face. So that's my primary use for this one. I don't use it as much on top of makeup. I use it more as an underneath makeup or kind of like a priming type step. And then I tend to go more for the Victoria Beckham to just tap onto the tops of my cheekbones to finish off a look. Before we get into bronzers, I think it makes sense to now talk about my top cheek palette of the year because it doesn't contain a bronzer. And just to round out the discussion about blushes and highlighters, I wanted to talk about the Natasha Denona My Dream Cheek Trio. This has 2 highlighters and a blush, a cream highlighter, a powder highlighter, and kind of a hybrid cream powder blush. The blush is another one, just like most of my other choices, that is just a great shade for me. It looks very natural on my skin tone, goes with so many different looks, and it really does feel like a powder in the pan, but I think she describes them as cream or cream to powder. It has a very, very lightweight, very smooth texture, really easy to apply. That's what the color looks like. And Natasha Denona's method for highlighter is to put down a cream first and then go on top with the powder, but I actually prefer to do the opposite. So I like to go in with the powder first. And this is to me quite a unique and really special powder highlighter. The texture is very different from most other powder highlighters that I've tried. There's just something extra soft. It's almost like there's a semi-translucent base to it, so that it doesn't look too opaque on the skin, but I do like to diffuse it with kind of a bigger, fluffier brush so it gives a more natural effect. But I love to put that on first and then top it off just kind of like I do with the Victoria Beckham cream, with the cream in here, which is right there, which is also very beautiful, a little bit more translucent than the powder, but again does that job of adding a little bit of brightness and a little bit of life and kind of moisture back into the skin after applying the rest of your makeup. And I find although this powder looks a little bit deep in the pan, it looks like it might be a little bit deep for very fair skin tones. I find it works really well for my skin. So it doesn't actually go onto the skin quite the same color that it looks in the pan. And lastly, let's get into bronzers. I have 2 cream bronzers and 1 powder bronzer that I wanted to feature today. The first cream bronzer is the Rare Beauty cream bronzer, the Warm Wishes bronzer stick, and I have mine in the shade Power Boost. This was the bronzer I wore all summer long, so I had to include it. It was a really great product for me in the summertime. I find it a little bit more than I want in the winter months because it's very, very pigmented and it has some warmth to it. So it's just a little bit too intense for my winter skin, my winter aesthetic, but it was absolutely perfect for me in the summertime when I usually had a little bit of a fake tan and when I wanted a more bronzy look overall. It's just so easy and quick to apply because it has that pigment level. It's a beautiful cream to powder finish. So it just glides onto the skin like a cream, but then blends out and diffuses and blurs the skin like a powder. So that was my perfect cream bronzer all summer long. And then my perfect cream bronzer in these cooler months is the Nars cream bronzer. So this is the Laguna cream bronzer, and I have mine in the shade Laguna 01. And you can see how light and neutral that shade is, and that's really why I love this. The texture of it is also beautiful. It's quite pigmented, but because it's such a nice light shade for me, I find it also really easy to apply. I don't really have to worry about going overboard because it's quite buildable at the same time. You can see it's just a little bit lighter, a little bit rosier, and a little bit more neutral than the Rare Beauty one. The downside that some people might see with this is that it is quite strongly fragranced. I don't mind the scent of this, but I could definitely see that being a deal breaker for some people, so just keep that in mind. And the best powder bronzer of the year for me has been from Haus. This is their Power Sculpt Velvet Bronzer, and this is the shade Light Level 1, the lightest shade in the range. And this, kind of similar to the Nars cream, is great because it's very neutral in tone, so it works really nicely for my skin tone. It almost seems like it has a little bit of an olive undertone, which I think works really well for me. It just seems to mesh with my skin tone very nicely. The texture of this is incredible. This is almost like a cream to powder texture as well. It is more of a true powder in the pan, but it's just incredibly smooth and feels very creamy to the touch. Blends out and diffuses really beautifully on the skin. It's incredibly buildable. So of these 3 that I've talked about here, this one I would say is definitely the most buildable in the sense that you can build it up gradually. So it's really nice to work with if you're not wanting to go too heavy with the bronzer, but you still want a little bit of that warming and sculpting effect. So there are my top 3 bronzers of the year. So that's the Rare Beauty Power Boost, Nars Laguna Cream 01, and Haus Light Level 1. So there were certainly other new products in these categories that I tried this year that I enjoyed a lot, but I really wanted to stick to my very top favorites. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I'd love to hear what your favorite cheek products were this year. Let me know if you have any other comments or questions. I always love to see those. And if you'd like to see more from me and you haven't subscribed to my channel already, I would love for you to do so. Thanks so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.